So good morning, Dr. Fine. We are here to, I guess, give people an opportunity who did not hear your presentation to have a little bit of information about what it was about. So we're talking measurement and control of ambient ultrafine particles. How are they measured?
There's a variety of measurement techniques for ultrafine particles. Probably the primary one right now is called a condensation particle counter, which basically counts the total number of particles in the atmosphere. But there's other techniques as well. You can get full size distributions of particles, which is how many particles of each size exist in the atmosphere. And there's a variety of techniques out there. You can also measure particle mass. It's a little more complicated. You have to have some kind of upper size cut that separates the particles, which is quite challenging. But there are a variety of techniques out there.
Okay, and how do you correlate measurements near to sources with ambient concentration?
Well, that's a little. There's not much of a correlation. We see when we take measurements next to sources like roadways or other types of combustion sources, we see very high levels of ultrafine particles. But as you move away, whether it's 300 meters away or in some cases up to a mile away, but once you get outside that zone, there is you basically just see the basically background ambient levels. So when you look across an entire area, what we have is a very heterogeneous distribution of ultrafine measurements. The closer you are to a source, the more you're going to see, and as you go far away, the levels can come down by a factor of 5 or 10.
So you can merely estimate from measures of other ambient pollutants. Is that true?
When you're next to a source, there is a correlation between emitted ultrafine particles and other co-pollutants like certain gases, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, things like that. But it's really source dependent. So if you're in an ambient situation away from a source, you can't estimate one based on the other. You can in one location under certain meteorological conditions and say certain traffic mixes and patterns, you'll see a correlation, but that correlation can break down at the same location the next day or even the next hour if the traffic mix changes.
So if there's going to be regulatory monitoring of ultrafine particles, what possible approaches are there?
Well, one approach is like we do in the U.S. for criteria pollutants like PM2.5 or ozone, carbon monoxide, which is where you set up an ambient monitor and then a region is judged against the ambient air quality standards based on what they measure at that monitor. However, because of the ultrafine issue that it's so source dominated, it's very difficult to do that because the location of the monitor is going to be very critical. And so another approach is looking at tailpipe emissions. There are regulations on the amount of mass that can be emitted from tailpipes of cars and trucks, and for things like nitrogen oxide. So it may be a better approach to look at the tailpipe and measure particles at the tailpipe and then make sure that the control technology is addressing the ultrafine particle problem rather than set it as an ambient standard. And there's precedence for this both in the emission controls, but also the way that we deal with air toxics in the U.S. as well under the Clean Air Act.
So the current approach for control of ultrafine particle emissions from light and heavy-duty trucks?
Well, the good news is when you're talking, there's kind of two types of ultrafine particles that come out of an emission source. There's the solid particles, and then there's these particles that are gases when they come out, but when they rapidly cool in the first meter or two after the stack or after the tailpipe, they can form new particles. So the good news is for the solid particles, the current controls that involve filtration are often very good at that control. So if you're controlling PM mass, you're also controlling ultrafines for the solid ultrafine particles. It's these other gases that may not be captured by any kind of filtration technology that will form particles after they're emitted very close to the tailpipe that also need to be addressed. And to do that, you just need to kind of tweak your control technology a little bit to also address removal of those gases that lead to ultrafine particle formation. In some cases, it's been shown that the pure mass controls that take out the solid particles can actually lead to an increase in the number of particles that come after the tailpipe. But it's also been shown that under certain conditions, that's not true, but also certain tweaks to the control technology using certain catalysts can address both and make sure that ultrafine particle numbers are not emitted. And it basically whatever applies to the tailpipe, say of vehicles in this case, could also be applied to stationary combustion sources as well.
Well, you've just answered my final question, so I think you're done.
Okay. You're welcome.